The year was 2014. Celebrities were dropping buckets of ice on their heads. Call of Duty players were pressing F to pay their respects. This man went viral for a certain catchphrase I'm not going to repeat to keep this video monetized. And Chaplin Barton was about to attend a local Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. Chap was a regular at these events, as not only was he an avid Yu-Gi-Oh enjoyer, but he also happened to be an employee at the store these events were held at. Now, being an employee, he'd seen his fair share of toxic players across his time working at the store, but nothing could have quite prepared him for the player he was about to encounter today. For this event, Chap chose to bring a deck he called Normal Monster Pendulum, which, as the name suggests, is a pendulum deck based around normal monsters. Now, for reference, this isn't actually a real art type. For some reason, Konami just has this weird habit of releasing pendulum monsters that happen to have synergy with normal monsters, but never actually enough of them, nor do they make them good enough to make the deck anything but a load of steaming hot garbage. But being an employee of the store, Chap was never really interested in winning these events. He was only interested in showing off some of the more for fun strategies with the goal of showing off different products and bringing in some newer players. This event was being held right after the release of New Challengers, a set that brought about one of Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever competitive pendulum decks, Qliphort. This deck was being quickly picked up by a large portion of the competitive player base, which included Chap's very first opponent of the day, a player who we're going to call Jay. Not much is known about this guy, but he was the very first person to bring Qliphort to Chap's locals, and Chap was incredibly eager to see the deck in action, and so the tournament began. Game 1. Chap had won the dice roll and decided to go first. He didn't really do a whole lot with his turn, considering his deck was just a bunch of effectless normal monsters, but he did set a Twin Twisters before passing over to his opponent. Jay began his turn by looking rather annoyed. Apparently, he wasn't too pleased by his opening hand. He proceeded to place 2 cards onto the field, one into each of his pendulum zones. Now, for you non-Yu-Gi-Oh players out there, don't worry, I'm not going to bother trying to explain to you the multiple thesaurus-sized rulings required to understand how the pendulum mechanic works. All you need to know is, in order to play the game, pendulum players need to have a card in both of these zones, and the cards in there are treated as spell cards. Now that Jay had 2 spells on the field, Chap simply responded by flipping his set Twin Twisters, popping both cards in those zones, essentially bringing Jay's turn to a halt. And with that, Jay very reluctantly conceded the game, and so we move on to Game 2. Game 2 was a bit more eventful than Game 1, with Jay going first. He began by placing Scout into one of his pendulum zones, paying 800 life points to use the effect, searching a Qli card from his deck. He then placed a second card into his other pendulum zone, and conducted a pendulum summon, summoning out 2 Qli monsters to the field. He proceeded to activate the spell card Sacrifice, allowing one of his monsters to be treated as 2 tributes for a tribute summon. Now with essentially 3 monsters worth of tribute on the field, he was able to summon out his boss monster, Towers. This card is actually a very famous card in Yu-Gi-Oh, as its very name is still used as a terminology till this day. A Towers monster in Yu-Gi-Oh basically means a monster that is really hard to remove. Maybe it's immune to destruction effects, maybe it's immune to targeting effects, but in the case of the OG Towers himself, he was immune to all card effects, making him incredibly hard to remove, especially considering he had 3000 attack and reduced the attack of all special summon monsters by 500. Feeling pretty pleased with himself, Jay passed the turn. Now, Towers may be a pretty hard monster to kill, but it's definitely not impossible, especially if it has nothing else to protect it. All you need to eat a big fish is an even bigger fish, to which Chap prepared the perfect answer. Chap placed 2 cards into his own Pendulum Zones, and proceeded to Pendulum Summon out 2 copies of Flash Knight, a level 4 monster with no effect. With 2 level 4 warrior monsters on the field, he can perform an Xyz summon, bringing out Heroic Champion Excalibur. Excalibur has a pretty simple effect. Once per turn, he can double his original attack until the end of your opponent's turn. 2000 doubled, 4k. Even after the attack reduction from towers, he was still at 3500, still just enough to bonk his way through his opponent's boss monster. At this point, Jay was looking a little bit irritated, and to add a bit of salt to the wound, Chap once again had a twister and deleted both of Jay's scales, preventing any more summons. He then passed the turn off to a very red-faced looking Jay. Unlike the previous game, despite losing both scales, Jay decided not to concede and put all his faith in top decking. For the next 3 turns, Chap watched as Jay drew absolute garbage, getting visibly more and more irritated with every single draw, whilst not being able to do much outside of placing a couple of monsters on the field to use as a wall defending his own life points. Okay, fuck this! Jay looked straight up at Chap and proceeded to go on an absolute tirade about how his deck was meta and under any normal circumstance, he should be winning. Chap didn't say anything, just stared at him. You got so fucking lucky. There is no way that pile of garbage of a deck could possibly beat mine. You know what, buddy? Put your money where your mouth is. Let's go again, you and me, but this time we wager. Put some money on the line. No. After mumbling something quite vulgar under his breath, Jay scooped up his stuff and left the table. But that isn't actually where this story ends. A few rounds of Swiss later, Chap unfortunately dropped from the event after losing too many games, and so he decided to head over to his mates and take a look at some trade binders. He was casually just flipping through one of the pages when suddenly he heard a massive thud coming from outside of the store. Chap spun around to see what on earth caused that sound. Pressed right up against the store window, staring straight back at him, was Jay's squashed up face. Apparently, after also dropping from the event, Jay decided to go outside the front of the store and try to pick a fight with one of the other players. God knows over what, but it looks like Jay's fighting skills were about as good as his dueling. Chap and a few other guys quickly rushed out the front of the store to break up the fight, and after hearing what had happened, the owner of the store was not happy. He immediately banned Jay from the store, but not only that, he made sure to spread the word to all local stores in the area, preventing him from attending any local tournaments in the future. And that brings us to the end of today's tale. Thank you so much, Chap, for sharing your story in the comment section of one of my previous story videos. And as per usual, if you too have a story from your time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And would like to have it recreated in this series, feel free to write it down in the comments below. Just make sure to leave enough context and detail so I can turn it into a full video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to see more stories just like this one, I've created a full playlist of this series, which I'll leave at the top of the description, or you can click that little card on screen now. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Laters.